thank you for joining us today at NewsX World. I'm Asuma Katauka. Ukrainian President Zelensky is right now addressing the media. Let us cut to the press conference.
Двосторонній трек. Дякую про всі пункти, які ми обговорили. Двосторонніх відносин. Ми дуже вдячні Німеччині за такий великий вклад в допомогу, посилення нашої держави, безпеки, про посилення нашої протиповітряної оборони і допомогу з початку цієї війни. Дуже дякуємо за це. Потім ми працювали на рівні європейських лідерів. Третій трек – це розмова з президентом Сполучених Штатів Америки, і закінчуємо після прес-конференції нашому формату щодо майбутньої безпеки і інфраструктури безпеки для нашої держави. Це Coalition Willings. Передусім, я хочу подякувати всім партнерам за підтримку України. І ми говорили з президентом Трампом сьогодні, президентом фон дер Ляєн, генсеком НАТО Марком Рюте, президентом Стубом, президентом Франції Еммануелем Макроном, головою уряду Італії Мелоні, президентом Польщі. Увесь тиждень від минулої середи тривали всі ці дуже інтенсивні комунікації, десятки цих комунікацій між усіма нами, європейськими лідерами, між Європою та Сполученими Штатами Америки, між нами та представниками інших частин світу, які прагнуть тільки одного – миру в Україні, миру в Європі. Сьогодні наші спільні позиції ми обговорили з президентом Сполучених Штатів Америки. Була перед цим координаційна розмова, як я вам сказав. Ми узгодили спільні принципи, 5 принципів, про які сказав Фрідріх. Я хочу тобі подякувати за лідерство в цьому напрямку, Фрідріхе. Саме це формат перемовин. Все, що стосується України, має обговорюватись виключно з Україною. Ми маємо готувати тристоронній формат розмови. Має бути припинення вогню, номер 1. Мають бути гарантії безпеки дійсно надійні. Сьогодні, до речі, президент Трамп сказав про підтримку цього і про готовність Америки брати участь. Також серед погоджених принципів Росія не може мати права вето щодо європейської та натівської перспективи України. І мирні переговори слід поєднувати з належним тиском на Росію. Санкції повинні бути і повинні бути посилені, якщо Росія не погодиться на припинення вогню в Алясці. Це ефективні принципи, і важливо, щоб вони спрацювали. Звісно, ми обговорили сьогодні ситуацію на полі бою. Я сказав президенту Сполучених Штатів Америки і всім нашим європейським колегам: Путін блефує. Він старається натиснути перед зустрічю на Алясці, на всіх напрямках українського фронту. Росія намагається зобразити, що спроможна окупувати всю Україну. Безумовно, це їх бажання. Також Путін блефує, начебто санкції для нього не важливі і що вони не працюють. Насправді санкції дуже допомагають і б'ють по російській воєнній економіці. Так, це правда, у Росії в кілька разів більше зброї, зокрема артилерії в 3 рази і подібного, але також у Росії в 3 рази більше втрат. І це факт. Я сказав колегам і президенту Сполучених Штатів Америки, і європейським друзям, що Путін точно не хоче миру, він хоче окупації нашої держави, і ми всі це дійсно розуміємо. Путін нікого не зможе обманути. Нам потрібен подальший тиск заради миру, не тільки американські, але й європейські санкції. І разом наш союз партнерів дійсно може зупинити війну Путіна. Ми говорили про зустріч на Алясці. Ми сподіваємося, що центральною темою на зустрічі буде припинення вогню, негайне припинення вогню. Про це неодноразово говорив президент Сполучених Штатів Америки. Він запропонував мені, що після зустрічі на Алясці у нас буде з ним контакт, і ми обговоримо всі результати, якщо вони будуть, і ми визначимо наступні наші вже взаємні кроки. Зараз у нас буде зустріч коаліції охочих заради миру та безпеки. І це дійсно наша мета. Саме для цього ми працюємо. Дякую всім, хто нам допомагає. Дякую ще раз Фрідріху. Слава Україні!
Ольга Танасічук, Українське державне інформаційне агентство. Запитання до пана Зеленського. Ви буквально вчора сказали під час спілкування з українськими журналістами, що Україна не піде з Донбасу в обмін на припинення вогню. Чи змінилася якимось чином ваша позиція після сьогоднішніх переговорів тут в Берліні? І запитання до канцлера Мерца щодо припинення вогню. Чи ставиться можливою умовою зняття або послаблення санкцій проти Росії в разі досягнення припинення вогню, і які гарантії безпеки на які гарантії безпеки Європа могла би піти?
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, European leaders, and US President Donald Trump held a high-level video call today ahead of Trump's Friday summit with Russian President Vladimir Putin in Alaska. French President Emmanuel Macron said that President Trump reaffirmed that any territorial issues can only be negotiated directly with Ukraine, and that his goal for the Alaska meeting is to secure a ceasefire. Macron also stressed that no new sanctions package against Russia is off the table. German Chancellor Friedrich Merz said there is no question of legally recognizing Russian-held territories and that a ceasefire must come first in any agreement. He added that European and Ukrainian security interests must be upheld in Alaska and that President Trump largely shares our views. President Zelensky reiterated Ukraine's stance that no talks on territorial concessions can take place without Kyiv's participation. Separately, President Trump won an appeal overturning a decision to freeze foreign aid with a U.S. appeals court setting aside an injunction that required funding to continue. Now for this discussion, we're joined by David Kay. He's a Johnston American author, joins us live from Washington, D.C. Thank you for joining us today. Welcome to NewsX World. Now, with President Zelensky's firm stance on territorial concessions, what do you think is the likelihood of finding a common ground in the upcoming U.S.-Russia summit?
Zero. It's zero. Vladimir Putin has been clear for more than 25 years that he thinks the worst thing that happened in the 20th century was the collapse of the Soviet Union, and he wants to put it back together. And the leaders of the countries bordering Russia, Moldova, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, they all understand that if Putin is not stopped, that he will, over time, send his tanks in to those countries. And Putin has no reason here to relinquish the gains that he's made. So I think the chances are zero. The concern I have is that Donald, whom I've known and covered for almost 40 years, will cave to whatever Putin puts forth when they meet in Anchorage, Alaska on Friday.
David, according to you, where does the relationship of Putin and Mr. Trump stand now, seeing that, or we used to assume before that their relationship was good, but now it's so ambiguous. What can you tell about that?
Well, I don't think it's ever been good. Because of the way Donald was raised by his father, who was a greedy, immoral monster, Donald is always trying to get approval from people he sees as all-powerful. He wants to be the all-powerful dictator of the United States. And Putin has outmaneuvered Trump at every turn because Donald is ill-matched here. Donald is appallingly ignorant about the world. He's a con artist, and he operates by bluff and bluster, not by substance.
Do you think, so how might Putin's reaction to Ukraine's non-negotiable stance shape the future of U.S.-Russia relations based on what you've described about the personality traits of President Trump?
Well, Trump has a problem. He said that he would settle the war in Ukraine in a single day. It's now been about 230 days since he took office, and he's gotten nowhere. He doesn't have the magical powers he tells his followers, as he loves to call them, the poorly educated. He doesn't have the magical powers he claims. But he's got to do something, and he also needs this meeting to divert attention from the Epstein files issue, why he's not making them public, and whether those files would establish that he is a repeat child rapist, which certainly appears to be likely based on the facts we do know in the public record, though there's no clear evidence of that, just a lot of smoke, no fire. Putin's problem is that in the third year of the war, 400,000 Russian soldiers died to capture 0.5% of Ukraine. That's probably the bloodiest butcher bill in the history of warfare. And while he's a dictator, he still has to be responsive to the people in Russia, or he'll face potential upsurges by dissidents.
Thank you very much, David K., for sharing that. Please stay with us as we come back to you for our next discussion as well. Now we move on. Russia has partially restricted calls on the WhatsApp and Telegram messaging apps, saying the move is aimed at combating criminal activity, state media reported today. Communications watchdog Roskomnadzor said the measure targets foreign platforms whose owners have ignored repeated requests to curb use for activities such as extortion and terrorism. It stressed no other functions of the apps are affected. The decision comes weeks after President Vladimir Putin signed a law to develop a state-backed messaging app integrated with government services, part of a wider push for digital sovereignty and to reduce reliance on foreign tech platforms, a drive accelerated since Western firms withdrew from Russia following its full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Meta, which owns WhatsApp and Telegram, have not commented on these restrictions yet. Now we go back to our guest discussion with David K. He's in Johnston, American author, joins us live from Washington, D.C. Thank you, David, for staying with us. Now, how do you interpret Russia's decision to partially restrict WhatsApp as well as Telegram on the context of its broader push for digital sovereignty?
Well, the Russian Federation has a real problem with communications. It does not have the kind of secure channels that the U.S. military routinely uses, that the Indian military routinely uses. So Ukraine, the United States, other countries have been able to listen in on communications going on between generals and people in the front on in this war in Ukraine, this attack on Ukraine. At the same time, other people are able to communicate through things like WhatsApp. Now, a really sophisticated electronic surveillance operation like the U.S. National Security Agency, the NSA, they can probably crack WhatsApp. But Russia, as best we know, isn't able to do that and certainly doesn't have the resources that the U.S. government has to do something like that. So by restricting WhatsApp and similar services like Telegram, what I think they're trying to do is make sure that messages aren't sent to people inside Russia who are disloyal. You'll notice there have been some very big hits by Ukraine on targets deep inside Russia. And that's what they're trying to address here, is this long-time, decades-long failure of the Russian military to have both internal secret communications and the ability to break into other people's communications.
And David, how might this push for a digital sovereignty influence global trends in internet censorship and data control, if it does have any effect?
I think this is one of the biggest looming issues in the world. It goes to the fundamental issue of privacy, and laws about that vary very differently. In the U.S., privacy is by and large by judicial decision, although there are 3 amendments to the Constitution that touch on this issue. In Russia and other authoritarian states, and the U.S. at the moment is a proto-authoritarian state, the government, of course, wants complete access to your information and doesn't want people communicating that it can't check up on. This is going to be a bigger and bigger issue because of the differences among cultures, politics, and countries, And this technology is going to be much more complex going forward than we're seeing now, because we're on the cusp of things like quantum computing, which would make it much easier to make discrete, that is, secret communications.
And David, now going back to your previous answer, you mentioned that Russia struggled or was not successful in making their own kind of secure app. So with Russia's move targeting foreign platforms now, do you believe this will accelerate the development within Russia for state-backed alternatives?
Well, I think the Russians recognize they've got a real problem. A number of Ukrainian attacks on the battlefield, for example, have been targeted on people because soldiers were picking up their cell phones and calling mama or their girlfriend and telling them where they were. And by listening in, the Ukrainians or their friends, like the US at the time, were able to pinpoint the location of those signals and hit them with cruise missiles, bombs, artillery fire. So I think Russia needs, from their perspective for their military, absolutely to develop secure communications. You don't do that overnight. It's not going to happen in the short run because of the complexity of it. And of course, Russia doesn't have the capital needed to invest in these things because of the sanctions, because of things like the oil they're selling to India is at 20% approximately below the world price. So they're starved for cash to pay their bills.
Thank you very much, David K. Johnson, for joining us and sharing your insight all the way from States today. Now we move on to our next news. Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan warned today that certain foreign actors, including Israel and the Kurdish YPG, are seeking to destabilize Syria. Speaking after talks with Syrian official Asad al-Shaibani in Ankara, Fidan cited recent violence in Latakia, Sueda, and the northeastern Kurdish regions as evidence of these efforts. Shaibani also warned against foreign interventions that push Syria towards sectarian and regional strife. Fidan pointed out that the YPG, part of the US-backed Syrian Democratic Forces, has failed to integrate into the Syrian state despite a March agreement. He added that until security concerns are met, Turkey cannot remain calm amid continuing risks of armed action. Now for this discussion, we're joined by Professor Evraim Inbar. He's a senior researcher at the Jerusalem Institute for Strategy and Security. Thank you, Professor, for joining us today. Good to see you.
My pleasure.
Now, what do you make of Turkey's accusations that foreign actors, including Israel and the Kurdish YPG, are destabilizing Syria?
I think that the Foreign Minister Fidan speaks with tongue-in-cheek. After all, for years, Turkish forces occupied parts of northern Syria. And not only that, they helped ISIS in destabilizing Syria and Iraq. So now, when they were successful in putting Shara in control of Damascus, they want him to stay there, and they don't want others to interfere. I think Israel has a duty, a moral duty, to help the Druze community, to help generally minorities in the Middle East to be able to defend themselves against jihadists, and the Damascus regime is to a large part the remnants of ISIS and jihadist organizations that is supported by Turkey. The government in Syria conducted a massacre in Sueda and in other parts of Syria where Druze are living, and Israel is simply defending those minorities.
And Professor, now how might these tensions impact Turkey's role in future negotiations or peace efforts with either Israel or Syria?
I think that it is an influential actor, and we don't want any tensions with Turkey. Turkey is an important country, a strong country, and we would welcome discussions with Turkey over the future of Syria. I think we are already conducting such discussions with the help of Azerbaijan, and I hopefully that this type of interactions will bring around about lowering of tensions and a cessation of the types of pronouncements made by the Foreign Minister of Turkey.
Thank you very much, Professor Ephraim, for joining us today and sharing your insight. Now we move on to South America, actually North America. Mexico has extradited 26 senior cartel figures to the United States in a major deal with the Trump administration, stepping up cooperation on cross-border crime. Those transferred include Abigail Gonzalez Valencia, leader of Los Cuines, and brother-in-law of Jalisco New Generation cartel boss Nemesio El Mencho Oseguera Cervantes, as well as Roberto Salazar, accused of killing a Los Angeles County Sheriff's deputy in 2008. The Mexican Attorney General's office said the handover was completed after U.S. prosecutors promised not to seek the death penalty. Gonzalez Valencia, arrested in 2015, is accused of financing CJNG's expansion into one of Mexico's most powerful and violent cartels, responsible for trafficking cocaine, methamphetamine, and fentanyl into the United States and beyond. Now for this discussion, we're joined by Dr. Satoru Nagao. He's a fellow at Hudson Institute, joins us live from Tokyo. Thank you, Doctor, for joining us today. Good to see you. Now, how do you assess the significance of Mexico's extradition of top cartel figures in its border strategy to combat cross-border crime?
Yes, border security is a very important part of the policy of the Trump administration. And for Mexico, this is a big issue when they need to deal with Trump administration. So that's why they try to show a cooperative manner. But recently, President Sheinbaum of Mexico refused the direct intervention of the U.S. military. So that's why Sheinbaum needs to prove Mexico can deal with drug issue, and if the United States need, Mexico arrest and send them to the United States. In this case, this is quite cooperative manner for Mexico, and for United States, Mexico is a trustworthy partner against drug cartels. So that's why this is a significant effort for the Mexican side to legitimize the sovereignty of the Mexico.
And Doctor, do you think this increased cooperation with the United States will lead to a lasting shift in Mexico's stance on its cartel violence as well as drug trafficking?
Cracking down the drug cartel in Mexico is a very important issue for Mexico. Mexico's law and order, this is very important anyway. But if the United States intervene directly, for Mexico, this is a little bit controversial because in the history, U.S. intervention creates something confusion in the Mexico many times. So that's why Mexico want to maintain the sovereignty and want to show their power to govern their country. So that's why, compared with the predecessor, the current President Sheinbaum tried to show strong cooperation to deal with the drug. With the United States in this case. And so that's why her stance is very cooperative. But President Trump's the policy towards cracking down the drug issue, this is very serious. And he wants the other country to show very, very, very strong stance against the drug cartels, which damage U.S. society. So that's why this is U.S. interest, you think, And view from Mexico, this is Mexico's interest too. So that's why President Sheinbaum's decision is cooperate with the United States cracking the drug cartel, but Mexico's sovereignty is sovereignty. That is attitude.
Now, building on your answer, Dr. Satoru, so given the prominent cooperation and now being big figures like connected to the powerful Jalisco New Generation cartel, what message do you think this sends about the increasing cooperation between U.S.-Mexico relationship on security matters?
This is important because without showing enough power of the Mexican side, President Trump will say, U.S. should take care of the security in Mexico. That is, of course, they haven't, Trump administration hasn't said anything about this, but at the same time, they changed the name of the Gulf of Mexico, the Gulf of America. So was Panama is part of America, Greenland is part of America, Canada is the 51st century. Under such kind of situation, Mexico should worry something more about Mexico. So that's why this is a serious issue. Cooperative manner is very important. At the same time, Mexico need to show their power because to maintain sovereignty, they need to show their power. But for a long time, Mexico suffers a drug war in their country. So that's why this is a big matter for Mexico, even if just after the Sheinbaum sworn in, her friends has killed, politician has killed by drug cartel. So that's why still this is a serious issue in Mexico. Mexico must deal with, Mexico must show they have enough power to deal with. They need to show, they need to prove that is the current situation. That Sheinbaum has already understand this situation. So that's why this is the answer of this. But this cooperation manner is not just following the United States. Mexico try to show their power. Drug issue is anyway the cross-border issue because the market is the United States, but production place is Mexico. So that's why this is global trade. So this is global smuggle, but of course, so illegal trade. So that's why anyway the cooperation manner is needed. Cross-border cooperation is needed to crack down. So that's why it has happened anyway.
Right. Thank you very much, Dr. Satoru Nagao, for joining us today and sharing your insight. Now we have a breaking news. UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer has told US President Donald Trump and European leaders that Britain's support for Ukraine is unwavering. In a call with Western allies, Starmer said international borders must not be changed by force and that Ukraine must have robust and credible security guarantees to defend its territorial integrity. Now for this discussion, we are joined by Ruben Johnson. He's a director at Asia Research Center at the Casimir Pulaski Foundation, joins us live from Warsaw. Thank you for joining us today. Welcome to NewsX World.
Thank you for having me, yes.
Thank you. Now, given Starmer's stance on territorial integrity as well as security guarantees for Ukraine, what's your assessment? How do you think this will influence the upcoming discussion, or if it has any influence on the upcoming discussion between Russia and U.S.?
I'm not expecting much to come out of this meeting at all. And I'll tell you why, if you don't mind. Usually when two parties go into a negotiation, they at least agree in principle on the end goal of these negotiations. That something happens at the end that they agree on. I can't think of anything that all the parties agree on. Donald Trump wants the war to stop. That's to his credit. He's right. There's too many people dying. Slaughter's terrible. But he just wants it to stop. And doesn't appear to be too particular under what conditions. Vladimir Putin, on the other hand, does not want the war to stop. The longer the war goes on, the better things are for him. As soon as the war ends for Putin, the war for him is like riding a bicycle. When you stop pedaling, you fall over and you're done. That's him. He depends on war to stay in power. The absence of war will kill his regime and possibly mean the end of his existence. And the other parties, of course, the Ukrainians, they would like the war to stop, but they're not willing to give up land, and nor should they. Why do you have to give up land to someone who illegally and invaded you in an unprovoked manner for no justifiable reason, using a made-up history that's completely made up out of whole cloth, and running around saying that Ukraine is ruled by Nazis when it has a Jewish president? So from the get-go, I don't understand what anyone is expecting to happen here.
Thank you for sharing that insight. Please stay with us, Ruben, as we come back to you and we stay on this topic. Now we have another breaking news. In EU Commission, President Ursula von der Leyen says Europe, the United States and NATO have strengthened their common ground for Ukraine. Speaking after a virtual meeting with Presidents Donald Trump and Volodymyr Zelensky, as well as European leaders, she described the discussions as a very good call and pledged that the EU will remain in close coordination with you on Ukraine. Now we have another breaking news. NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte has praised President Donald Trump's leadership and close coordination with allies following a virtual meeting on Ukraine. Rutte has said that NATO remains united in pushing to end what he called the terrible war against Ukraine. He described the discussions, which included President Volodymyr Zelensky and European leaders, as a great call ahead of President Trump's upcoming meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin in Alaska. Now for this discussion, we go back to Ruben Johnson. He's a director at Asia Research Center at the Kazimierz Pulaski Foundation. Thank you, Ruben, for staying with us. Now, you mentioned that you're not expecting much from the upcoming summit between President Putin and President Trump, but how do you interpret Ursula von der Leyen, also interpret the NATO leader Rutte's statements about strengthening the common ground between the EU, US, and NATO on Ukraine? Do you think this has changed US President Trump's mind anyhow in including Ukraine in upcoming talks?
Well, President Trump's mind was already changed before this happened. Before the famous Oval Office meeting with General Secretary Rutte, because he had been, if you know the history on this, what had happened was right around the 4th of July weekend, this big holiday in America, which is our Independence Day. The Polish Foreign Secretary Radoslaw Sikorski had called General Keith Kellogg, who is retired Lieutenant General, who is Donald Trump's special envoy for Ukraine and Russia. He had called him and he said, hey, number one, the Russians have launched another huge attack on Kiev, and one of their drones has hit the Polish embassy. And number two, Putin is mocking your peace efforts. He thinks it's just a joke, and he's using it to his advantage. And General Kellogg immediately called Trump and told Trump what was going on. And Trump said, that's it. You call Pete Hegseth at the Pentagon and you start sending all these weapons. And if Hegseth doesn't believe you, have him call me. So that was a watershed moment. And then we had a meeting in the Oval Office, just a number of days later with the NATO Secretary General, and Trump saying, hey, we have a great deal. The Europeans are going to buy these weapons, and then we are going to, and then they're going to take delivery of them, then they're going to give them to the Ukrainians, but it's going to be European money paying for them, not American taxpayer money.
Thank you very much.
Sorry.
Oh, you can complete your answer, Ruben.
So what I'm saying is that, of course, we know what Trump is like. He's mercurial, and we don't know. He could change his mind tomorrow about something. And I'm very worried about the fact that this is going to be a Putin-Trump one-on-one, and there will be no quote-unquote experts in the room. And Putin's extremely adept at spinning a lie and trying to make it sound like the truth and talking about all the victimization. Russians are always victims. They're never perpetrators. They've never done anything wrong. only horrible, wrong things have been done to them. So I'm very, very cautious about all of that. But I guess the other thing we should remember is that Trump has already said that this entire event on the weekend, this is not a summit. This is not a decision-making event. He says this is a listening event. He's going to listen and probably render some sort of a final decision later. But I think all of us who are watching Ukraine and all of us who are fearful of what happens next are kind of waiting on pins and needles.
Yeah. So Ruben, you think that they won't even reach a ceasefire in this upcoming summit?
I'll tell you what's going to happen. Putin will offer a completely useless deal. He will offer, well, sort of partial ceasefires, like, okay, we won't hit power plants anymore, but we'll continue to hit military targets. And within military targets, that means cities, because every time a missile slams into an apartment building or a hospital, they claim they were shooting for something else. So that'll be the first thing. It'll be completely meaningless on that count, because it's not that the Ukrainians will take that anyone will take seriously, because the Russians, as I said, they don't want the conflict to end. And I guess the only other thing I would say is that any kind of a ceasefire would have to be something that would be enforceable and would have to be monitored. Who's going to monitor it? The OSCE, this organization that the Russians have completely hollowed out, that's who you're going to have do that? Who's going to do it? The UN? The UN, who's been useless on Ukraine ever since the beginning. So who's going to monitor this? Who's going to say, who's going to be the authority who decides who's broken the ceasefire? And then what's the punishment if someone breaks a ceasefire? What are the sanctions for that? So again, I'm very, very skeptical. And of course, where all of this will go is that if Zelensky doesn't agree to Putin's unreasonable demands, then the narrative will be that, oh, well, Vladimir Zelensky, he's the obstacle to peace. We're only still fighting because of him. He's the only reason. That'll be the Russian narrative. And I'm sure other people will pick it up as well.
And Ruben, do you think that this statement by European Union, all of them together, the leaders that are coming in and issuing these statements, it means nothing to Putin?
I think it means very little to Putin. Putin doesn't care about the EU. Putin thinks the EU is a paper tiger. I mean, look at the size of some of their militaries. Look what they say. They say, well, oh, we're all spending 5% on military. Well, really? Is it really 5%? It really isn't, because they're repackaging things that they were already doing, like improving rail lines. So that was already in somebody else's budget. So if you take money out of somebody else's budget that's already allocated and you move it over here and you say it's defense spending, that's not really more defense spending.
Right. Thank you very much, Ruben Johnson, for joining us today and sharing your insight all the way from Warsaw. Now we move on to our next news. At least 20 people have passed away after a migrant boat capsized off the southern Italian island of Lampedusa, according to the United Nations Refugee Agency and local media. Rescue teams have recovered the bodies, while between 70 and 80 survivors have been pulled from the water. Officials fear more may still be missing. UNHCR's Filippo Ungaro voiced deep anguish, saying another 20 people remain unaccounted for. The Italian Interior Ministry has yet to comment on the tragedy, which comes amid rising migrant crossings in the Mediterranean. This is all we have time for. We will continue to bring more news updates from around the world.